Welcome to the No Quit Living podcast, where we aim to inspire and motivate people to never give up on themselves or their dreams. We will chat with highly successful people from all walks of life and discuss what motivates and drives them to successfully attack life head on and never give up. Welcome to episode number 22 of the No Quit Living podcast. I'm your host, Christopher J. Worth, and today's theme of the day is saying yes. Our quote of the day comes to us from Dan Brule. When you say yes, the universe helps you. This episode of the No Quit Living podcast is brought to you by the I3 Initiative. In today's society, it is so easy to get caught up in the drama, negativity, and uncertainty in the universe we are a part of. Against those challenges, we are committed to make the world a better place through improvement, impact, and integrity. You are invited to join our mission and learn more about our book club, membership, live events, and mastermind at i3initiative.com. That's the letter I, the number 3, initiative.com. I believe you will really enjoy today's episode. Our guest is full of energy, and he challenges me a couple of times throughout today's episode, which I'm sure our listeners will enjoy. In addition to sharing some very powerful advice, our guest is also the host of one of the best podcasts that is about to pass 9 million total downloads. We also have a very special treat for our listeners today. For the first 3 people that leave the No Quit Living podcast a 5-star rating on iTunes and email me a screenshot, we have a free copy of the book Profit First by Mike Michalowicz. So please make sure you take a screenshot and email that to chris@noquitliving.com. Once again, that's chris@noquitliving.com. Without further delay, I'm very excited to bring you today's episode and to introduce Michael O'Neill. Michael, I'd like to welcome you to the No Quit Living podcast.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it, Christopher.
Pleasure is all of ours. There seems to be quite a bit of negativity flowing throughout the media today. As our number one objective is to both inspire and motivate our listeners, I wanted to ask if you could share a personal story about perseverance, or perhaps a challenging time that tested you, but you kept on going and never quit.
I suppose the biggest is that I was a web guy for 15 years. I did branding and design and development on the web and print. And then I lost both my parents very quickly, within 8 months of each other in 2007. And it really leveled my life. Not only was I obviously heartbroken, but I lost I lost my house and a couple of cars and my 401k and the whole bit. And I decided to, instead of sort of letting that tell the story of my life, that I would actively reset it. So I went to Europe. I got a little Italian Parmesan cheese shaker and I put their ashes in it and I spread their ashes all around Europe where I wanted to take them when I was a quote unquote successful adult. And so I did that for a few months and I came back into the States in 2009 and I had $14. And I decided to start saying yes to things. And I knew I didn't want to ever work $1 for an hour again. So that sort of began my solopreneur journey. And, the rest is history. 7 years later, my show has 9 million downloads. And so here we are.
Speaking of your Solopreneur Hour is an excellent podcast filled with not only awesome content, but you've also had some really successful guests on your show. What has been your biggest personal takeaway from your podcast?
That most successful people say yes first and then figure out the details later. And most average people say maybe and then figure out a way to not do something, whether it's time or money or whatever. So most of the successful people go, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. And then they make it work, whatever it is. So if it's an opportunity or of some sort, they make it work in that respect.
That's a great story. Most successful people say yes first and they figure it out later. I wonder how many people would fall under the other category of saying maybe, or automatically their first response is to say no.
98% of the humans in the world. I mean, it's a huge most people.
No, I could not agree. I could not agree more at that. And I think sometimes people look at with every challenge as opportunity, as opposed to a lot of people look at with every challenge, there's some negativity as opposed to really taking a look at and saying, well, what can I make from this challenge?
Well, we don't. For some reason, we get complacent about things that that we don't love. Whether we're in a job we don't like, or we're in a relationship we don't like, or we have friends around us that don't support us, we just stick with it for some reason, and it's the primary reason why people are unhappy. And I don't understand why people continue to do things that they're unhappy about. It's just an odd. It just because it's comfortable, because it's what we know. And that is very strange to me. So I think a lot of people, the last real major discomfort they felt is when they, went to school the first time, when they were just a little kid, and they just went to school and they didn't know anybody. And they, so when someone says, oh, I don't want to move there, I don't know anybody. It's like, well, you're going to get to know humans. There's other people in the world that you could talk to, So I see that a lot. And to me, it's one of the main reasons why people aren't that happy.
No, it's interesting. And I wonder if there was a way to track it, how many people approached their comfort zone or right to the end of it and just stopped and unfortunately missed out on some great opportunities, whether it's personal, romance, job, career. I just think so many people are limiting themselves by that bubble of their comfort zone.
Oh, it's huge. Hey, what part of the country are you in?
We are Greenwich, Connecticut.
Oh, cool. All right. That's cool. I heard some northeastern thing happening there. I just wasn't sure what it was. I'm from Philly originally, so I heard it.
All right, don't hold it against me.
No, not at all.
Many of our listeners are into personal development and looking to improve different areas of their lives. I was interested if you have a favorite book that had a significant impact on you, or perhaps you've read something recently that you'd like to recommend to our listeners.
Let's see. There's been many, but I think the most significant impact book I've had recently is called Profit First by Mike Michalowicz. And in fact, I was talking to, you guys know John Lee Dumas. Have you had him on the show?
Yep, I've had him on a show, and we've actually been fortunate to be a guest on his show as well.
Cool. So he's a great financial guy, and so we had just done he and I do these workshops called Pod Mastery that are advanced podcasting workshops for people that are really trying to make a living at it. And we were sitting down having breakfast, and I said, dude, where do I start? Like, if I don't have, I wasn't grown up in an environment of financial savvy. It's not like I got lessons from my dad or from my environment on, how to really treat and invest and grow money. So I said, where do I start? And he said, Profit First. And so this is a book by a guy named Mike Michalowicz. He just came out with a new version of it. And in fact, let's see, how can we do this? If one of I have a couple of copies because they sent them to me, but I wonder what we could do. We got to come up with some kind of contest for one of your listeners, and I can send them a copy of the book. But anyway, it was the game changer for me in terms of how to manage my finances. It just changed the entire scope of really what my life looks like from a financial standpoint.
I've not heard of that book. It's Profit First. When was that written? Is that a recent book or?
It's been out for a couple of years. He just revised it recently, like within the last couple of months. So, and the guy's name is Michalowicz. It's Michalowicz. Michalowicz.
I have a couple ideas for a contest. We can talk after in post-recording. I think it'd be something interesting.
All right, good. I got a copy of Profit First in my hands, waiting for one of your listeners.
That is awesome. Speaking before we recorded, you talked about the art of the interview, and you gave me some pretty good advice. So I wanted to just ask if you could briefly touch on that, which is the artoftheinterview.co. Wanted to know if you could possibly share a minute or two about that and how our listeners possibly could follow you and or contact you if they're interested in that program.
Yeah, it's since I started podcasting, since day one, I decided that I was going to do whatever the professionals would do. So I would have the gear that they had. I would really treat it like I was focusing on what traditional broadcasters do versus what marketers that had podcasts do. And when I look at the landscape of especially marketing podcasts, I mean, they're awful. No one pays any attention to like typical procedures of broadcasters. And, so we've sort of turned it into this hybrid of internet marketing and podcasting. And it turns out to not be very entertaining for listeners. So when you think back about how you learned as you grew up, you learned because people told great stories. That was the deal. They were great storytellers. That's what you learned from that great teacher, was great stories. And there's ways to elicit great stories from your guests, but you got to have your chops. So you got to be a decent interviewer. And we're few and far between, I think, in the podcast world. So after doing a ton of shows and having people that were greats, I mean, Larry King and Cal Fussman and, people that were like real interviewers, say, I have such a good time on your show. I can think about like a guy like Pat Flynn who says, yours is my favorite show to do, And I get that a ton. People like Derek Halpern that haven't been publicly on anything for 3 years that says, dude, writes to me and says, dude, I want to be on your show. And that's because I focus so much on the art of the interview. And I really try to cater and coddle my guests. So, ultimately you hope that some big influencer will share your show. And they're only going to do that if you're good at it. So a bunch of people had asked me, can you teach that? And it's really hard because it's really the art of conversation. So how do you teach someone the art of conversation? So it took me a long time to make. In fact, I masterminded it at JLD's house in Puerto Rico. And it came out last October. It's about $500. It's artoftheinterview.co. And I did a couple things that I've never seen before. One being that it is, I delivered the content in 3 completely different ways. So you can read it. So there's like a Kindle ebook version. There's a full podcast version, and then there's the video version. And they're all completely separate and unique. They're not like I didn't just extract the audio from the video for the podcast. It's like I literally re-recorded the whole course, podcast only, because I figured a lot of podcasters were going to pay attention to it. And I've gotten incredible feedback on it, and the people that have taken it say, I mean, your mileage may vary, but that their podcast, their guest quality, the ability for the other guests to share their show has all like massively increased because of it. So I'm really proud of it. And, if you're an aspiring podcaster, or you're going to be doing video interviews, or you want to talk to other human beings on the planet, I think it can help.
I think that's a very wide range of whether you want to be a successful podcaster or talk to any human beings. I think
that's right. Probably
there's not a lot of people who wouldn't fit in one of those 2 categories.
Well, we're pretty boring, I think, as a society. People don't realize that we learn from entertainment. Entertainment has to come first. So when we have a bunch of data-driven people doing podcasts, which are like top 10 ways to get more views on your blog, and they're just banging down a list, that's not entertaining to people. But finding out, the reasons behind something, or how someone came upon this information, or what their story was behind it, you remember stories. So it's our job as podcasters to get those stories out of our guests and make it engaging and entertaining.
Now, if you wouldn't mind sharing again, how many total downloads have you had on your podcast so far?
I'm approaching 9 million at the moment. I'm 8 point something right now.
9 million podcast downloads. I think that speaks highly of the fact that not only do you have a quality show, but the one thing that I've enjoyed from your show is it continually gets better. Not only the guest, but also the podcast themselves as far as the content. And I think it just speaks to you about it is a talent and it is a skill. And what's the quote there that takes 10,000 hours to become an expert in any topic?
Sure. I mean, all I do is study stand-up comedy and interviewers, and I mean, that's all I do. It's like most of my life.
All right, I gotta ask if I could say your top 1 or 2 stand-up comedians, who would they be?
Well, it varies because I go through phases. Right now, if you ask me that, my 2 favorites are probably Anthony Jeselnik and a guy that's still kind of up and coming called Nate Bargatze. It's kind of hard to pronounce his last name.
Now, I know he's passed, but were you a fan of Mitch Hedberg at all?
I listen to a lot of Mitch Hedberg, and I sometimes is the answer. I love one-liner comedy. I love it. and that's why I like Jeselnik so much. Jeselnik is in the vein of Stephen Wright and Mitch Hedberg, but has a darker kind of punchline. Are you a Hedberg guy?
I'm not per se a Hedberg guy. My brother, my father, and I are all big fans of comedy. I think it's a very difficult thing to do. One of my very good friends from high school is a stand-up comedian right now, and he's just had a tough time over the last few years. He's now crossed the hump, but having gone to some of his shows and seeing the time and effort that he's put into it, I don't know a lot of other careers that are that difficult, where literally every night you have to get in front of people and they're either going to do one of two things, like you or completely boo you. And it's pretty tough, and I think it shows a lot about their perseverance. So I'm a big fan of comedy in general, but I just happen to have a couple different stations on my car, and I've heard Mitch quite a few times, and there's just some times that he just goes into some of his one-liners, and I just can't help but absolutely crack up.
Oh, he's great. I would repeat a couple, but probably none.
Yeah, no, we'll save that for off the time. This is a G-rated show.
Do you want to plug your buddy who's the stand-up though?
Joe Prano. He's out in L.A. Joe Prano.
Preno.
Praino.
Okay, I'll keep an eye out for him because I'm in San Diego.
Yeah, it's awesome. That would be great. He's doing as much as he can out there. He's originally from the East Coast, and he's done a lot out here, but he moved out to California, I want to say probably 5 or 6 years ago. So he's killing it as far as time, effort, and hopefully, knock on wood, he'll get his opportunity to make it.
Well, I think that there's nothing more, as you touched on, there's nothing that's more akin to entrepreneurship than stand-up comedy, because you get to try and fail and try and fail and try and fail every single night, and it's forged in fire.
Yeah, it's some of the toughest skin as far as really sticking with it, because you could have a great show one night with almost the same material, and then drive 5-10 minutes down the road and deliver almost the same material, and you could completely bomb, and that's just a challenge of where your business and my business is. We don't have that all the time, where you do a great show or you do a great interview, and on a Tuesday it works, but then on Wednesday you go and it just completely bombs.
Yeah, it's very we're lucky in that way. But you know what? You can build courses, and you can put content out, and people can not like it. You can get feedback. You can put a podcast out and read your iTunes reviews and see how well that goes.
So I happen to be a big fan of quotes. I was curious, do you have a favorite quote?
Never take advice from broke, unhappy people.
Is that a Michael O'Neill quote, or is that somebody else?
I don't remember where I heard it, but I heard it. I loved it. It might be Jim Rome.
That is a great quote. Life is incredibly challenging. On a personal note, I was curious, what motivates and drives you every day to keep going?
I'm not one of those people that needed like a lot of external motivation and kind of mindset stuff. I've never sort of looked at this and gone, oh God, I'm going to give up now. It's just never even been a factor for me. So I don't know. I suppose the drive is that I have expensive hobbies. and I got to pay for them. I like watches and cars. Yeah. I don't know. It's not a big altruistic thing, or just being honest, giving back to the world. Really, I'm not motivated by any of that stuff. It's the antithesis is never an option. Meaning, it's not even failure is not an option, because failure happens all the time. It's just like, what am I going to stop? Of course I'm going to keep going. I'd be bored if I did something else. So maybe lack of boredom is my motivation.
I like that. Lack of boredom. I like that. Could probably fall into a lot of different people that get stuck in the 9 to 5 doing the same thing day in and day out until they collect either a pension or a 401k at some point. Yeah,
that's probably true.
We touched on briefly the Solopreneur Hour, which is your podcast, as well as the Art of the Interview. I was curious if you have anything else coming out in the next few months that you'd like to share briefly with our audience.
Let's see. What am I doing? Art of the Interview is kind of the big thing. It's the push at the moment. So I don't have a lot other than that. But I've got a book that I'm working on called Unemployable as I Am. I'm going to be doing speaking at a conference in Australia called We Are Podcast, which will be cool in November. And what else am I doing with my life these days? That's probably it, man. That's what I've got right now.
Do you need someone to open up for you out in Australia? I could help carry your bag or...
Hey, man, if you can pay your way, you're welcome to do all of that. It would be awesome.
Be careful what you say for. Before we let you go real quick, I wanted to ask if you had any parting words about no quitting for our audience.
It's weird. I'll quote something from a buddy of mine who I think probably quoted it from someone else. But I feel like we can really get into this overwhelmed state when we're doing these things because there's so many skill sets. When you're trying to do something like this on your own, let's say you came from a regular job and you were really good at Excel spreadsheets, so you had to be good at Excel spreadsheets, and that's about it. You had to go and punch your clock and talk to people and deal with the guy who was next to you in the cube who was kind of smelly. And so you just sort of have your life. But now you're faced with, well, I've got to learn WordPress, and maybe you're a podcaster. You're like, I have to learn how to edit a podcast or how to be a good podcast host, or, in addition to doing a website, and now I've got to learn how to publish. And there's all these different skill sets with social media and all this stuff. And we can really easily feel overwhelmed. So I think Matthew Kimberly, my buddy, said, feeling overwhelmed is not necessarily a factor of having too much to do, but rather not knowing what to do first or not knowing what to do next. It doesn't matter. It's all these piles of things in front of us that we feel like we have to do, but you can really make massive progress, even if it's just a couple of minutes a day. So if this is your little side gig and you can just even 15 minutes a day, devote some time, do a couple of social media posts that you might schedule with, whatever, Buffer, Social Jukebox, whatever you use. Or get a scheduling tool and start scheduling people for podcast interviews. Just make a little bit of progress every single day can make a huge difference in and just keeping in mind that most people don't take action. Like a huge majority of people don't actually take action, which is why if you take any action, you are in the elite 1%.
That's something I want to touch on briefly because we did kind of discuss it a little bit earlier, but in regards to that, why do you think that people take the time and effort to plan or prepare or do something, but when it comes to taking the action, they don't? Do you think it's fear of the unknown or fear of failure? Or sometimes maybe do you think it's fear of success and the fact that if they did succeed, they might say to themselves, well, if I did put this effort in other things, I could probably be a lot more successful.
Yes. All of those things. It is really, there's numerous fears that are attached to this endeavor, because just like a stand-up, you could do one thing that totally crushes and then literally the next week do something else that it is a complete and utter, bomb. So I think that you have to steel yourself. I don't know. I sort of always approach things like, of course, things are definitely going to go wrong. Unquestionably, they're going to go wrong. It's how well we adapt to them as solopreneurs that is the difference between, I think, giving up and persevering.
No, and I wish there was a way to track all the people that have given up right before the end. And to use a sports analogy, is how many people have given up within the 1 yard line or within the 5 yard line, and they've gone all the way down the field, but they don't see that immediate results, and they just give up, and pack it in. And you wish you could kind of be on their shoulder and say, keep going. And obviously it would be impossible to track, but I'm sure there are so many people, companies, businesses, relationships that were just stopped a foot or 2 feet before crossing over that finish line. For sure.
And sometimes you can't blame them. People put in a lot of time and they say, look, I just need a break and I can't do it anymore. Like it's too much, it's why people quit stand up. Yeah. But the opposite is true as well, where sometimes you do it and you keep cranking, and then it's just one little opportunity, one yes, and it makes all the difference in the world. Get to conferences. Get to a conference per quarter. If you are in this space, you need to budget, allocate time, money, resources to get to one conference a quarter. And some of the conferences could be small and they could be local, but factor in one or two big ones and then maybe a couple of small ones. I have a little free course called Conference-topia, Chris, because most of my success I can trace back to people that I've met at conferences. So I've tried to share a bunch of that knowledge and how you can really grow your business just by conferencing. So conferencetopia.com is how you can find that, and it's free.
Conferencetopia.com, and it is free. I think the listeners will enjoy that. You mentioned that for this space. I would just have to challenge you in the sense that I think in any space, people need to go to conferences in their area of expertise or an area that they're looking to become an expert in, because I feel that you always need to push yourself and you can always learn from others. So I would just challenge you not only on this space, but for our listeners that are in different fields and different industries, is you always can improve and you can always get better at whatever you are doing.
For sure. Yeah. Unquestionable.
Now here's a question a little bit outside the 9 dots. If you could have dinner with anyone, dead or alive, who would it be and why?
What are the 9 dots?
Just kind of a. I've heard that many times. So here's a question.
I've never heard that in my life.
See, I learned a lot from you today. Hopefully our listeners did, and I taught you something. Whether it's good or bad, it's something.
I'm gonna assume that we can't just have my parents because it would be them. But let's see. Who would it be that would be really awesome? So I can have, you said, what is it? Dinner with anybody?
Anyone dead or alive. Who would it be and why? And I could be one of the guests if you really wanted to have dinner with me too.
Oh, that's cool. So definitely you, and then, no, let's see. Who would it be? That's a good question, man. I think maybe probably maybe Sting would be kind of fun. I'm a musician. I've been playing music my whole life. So it'd be kind of fun to play with him, or maybe Harry Connick Jr. would be kind of fun because he's funny. But I don't know. I feel like if I was going big, Seinfeld. It'd be Seinfeld. That's who it'd be. Unquestionably.
How about this? How about Seinfeld, Sting, and Harry Connick Jr. and Michael O'Neill at one dinner?
I wouldn't want that.
No?
I would want one-on-one with because the dynamic wouldn't be great.
Yeah, I was about to say, the four of you, I don't know if the conversation would flow as positively as you would like. I think some people would probably manipulate a lot of the conversation.
Well, Sting's like an arrogant, kind of douchey guy, but I think Seinfeld's super judgy. I think Harry would be the most pleasant of everybody, but I think they'd all be great individually.
No, that is awesome. That is a pretty diverse group of people. Well, listen, I know a lot of people have different social medias and things. Do you have a preferential way that our listeners should follow you or connect with you for those that are interested in not only some of your courses, but also just following you on social media as well?
If I placed that question to you, would you be able to answer that?
I would, but depending on when you ask that. So, for example, if it was within the last month, it would be geared towards our podcast. If it was within the last week or so, it would be geared towards our website.
No. I mean, for me, what would you say if someone said, how do I get in touch with Michael O'Neill on social media or on the web?
Oh, gotcha. Via your, the first thing I would recommend people is again, now this is flipping the switch back on me, which I like, is definitely for my listeners that have not checked out your podcast. That would be the first place that I would definitely recommend. And you and I spoke about it pre-recording, is I am personally going to check out your program, The Art of the Interview, because I think, as you mentioned earlier, is anybody who's looking to be in the podcast world or talk to anybody, as you said, could learn from that. So those would be my first 2 touch points, but I'm not sure if there's anything else.
Do you have my URLs though in front of you?
I have them in front of you, and I will also put them in the show notes as well. So the solopreneur.com, as well as you can follow Michael on Twitter and social media under Solo Hour. And I believe you said, I heard in an interview that most people can't pronounce or say solopreneur, so that's why you shorten some of it to Solo Hour.
That's right, solohour.com, because no one can spell preneur.
And just
we're not good at it here.
And a plug to your podcast. In the beginning of your podcast, you have some of the outtakes of people messing up saying solopreneur, which is kind of funny.
That's right.
In that regard.
I do that. I sometimes I really hope that they'll mess it up the first time they say it.
Well, as you know, you can edit after interviews, so I'm sure you could play around with a lot of things, and you could actually make some really good interviews kind of sound a little bit goofy by just twisting some things around.
I suppose I'm a purist, so I just hit record and I hit stop, and everything else is what's in the show. I don't do any editing on my show ever.
Well, listen, Michael, I can't thank you enough for your time. You shared some great stuff with our listeners. Hopefully they will follow you and your programs and connect with them. And I really, really appreciate it. And I look forward to speaking with you soon.
Thanks, dude. Hopefully we'll run into each other at a conference or something.
Definitely. To sum up today's episode and our theme of the day, saying yes, Michael definitely brought it for today's episode. He challenged us to take only 15 minutes every day and to try and improve ourselves. He then discussed the idea that when it comes down to it, most people do not take the action required. He said something that I think was very insightful. He suggested for our listeners to attend one conference per quarter. No matter what your field, industry, or area of interest, he suggests the importance of always learning. We will coin that term ABL, always be learning. Michael shared his story, how back in 2007, he lost both of his parents within 8 months, and it snowballed from there. He lost his house, his car, and eventually his 401k. After traveling out of the country, Michael returned to the United States in 2009 with only $14 to his name. But he never gave up, and he didn't quit. The most powerful part I took from today's episode was when Michael shared with us his feeling that most successful people say yes first and figure it out later. So the question for you is, do you say yes first, or is your immediate response no? Do you accept challenges and look at them as opportunities, or do you look at these challenges as insurmountable obstacles? In life, we all experience obstacles, and we all encounter numerous challenges throughout our day and our week. When you are faced with your next challenging time, I dare you to say yes and attack this opportunity head on. You never know where your next yes could lead you to, and if that next yes becomes your greatness. And again, for today's special, for those that are interested in your free copy of the book, Profit First by Mike Michalowicz, please make sure you take a screenshot after you give us a 5-star rating on iTunes and send that to chris@noquitliving.com. And lastly, to our listeners, thank you. We truly appreciate your time, and we hope our episodes inspire you to keep on attacking life and never giving up. To quote Dr. Norman Vincent Peale, it's always too early to quit.